Discipline is not merely a matter of willpower or rigid control. It is the alignment of the psyche with purpose. Most people imagine discipline as a war against themselves, a constant struggle to suppress impulses and desires. But in truth, discipline is born not from suppression, but from understanding. When the conscious and unconscious find order, when your drives, instincts, and goals are not at war, discipline becomes natural. It ceases to feel like a chain and begins to feel like strength. What destroys people is not lack of discipline, but inner conflict. They want one thing and desire another. They fear failure and crave comfort. They aspire to greatness yet serve their laziness. This inner fragmentation leads to paralysis. Discipline emerges when the psyche is united, when the individual learns to face his shadow, to accept responsibility, and to orient himself toward a higher aim. Discipline does not come into being through force alone, but through the clarity of aim that gathers all parts of the psyche into a single direction. When a man is unclear about what he seeks, he becomes a prisoner of conflicting impulses. One moment he desires comfort, the next he dreams of greatness, and the next he falls into despair. His will is scattered like broken glass, reflecting light in 1,000 directions, but focusing on nothing. Such a man cannot be disciplined because he has given his energy to confusion. Discipline requires the unification of psychic energy around one aim, and this unification begins with clarity. To ask yourself, what do I truly want and why do I want it? Is the first act of discipline, for without an answer to this question, every effort will collapse under the weight of doubt. Clarity acts as a compass for the unconscious. The unconscious does not obey abstract commands such as be disciplined or work harder. It responds to symbols, images, and deeply felt meaning. If your goal is vague, your unconscious has nothing to attach itself to, and thus it resists, distracting you with impulses and temptations. But when the aim is vivid, when it is tied to something greater than fleeting pleasure, the unconscious begins to cooperate. You no longer feel that you are dragging yourself forward. Instead, you are carried by an inner momentum. This is why clarity is not a luxury, but a psychological necessity. Without it, the will remains weak, and discipline appears only in short bursts before collapsing again. The absence of clarity leads to inner contradiction. A man may attempt to work, but deep down he questions whether his work matters. He may attempt to train his body, but deep down he wonders whether the effort is worth it. This constant questioning drains psychic energy. It is not failure that destroys discipline, but ambiguity. Once clarity is found, effort becomes natural. Think of the soldier who marches tirelessly not because marching is enjoyable, but because his aim is clear and larger than himself. The body tires, but the mind endures because it knows why it suffers. In the same way, clarity transforms the pain of effort into a meaningful struggle rather than a pointless burden. Clarity also eliminates the illusions that waste our time. Many live chasing goals that are not truly their own, but borrowed from society, family, or peers. Their lack of discipline is not weakness, but rebellion the unconscious resists, serving an aim that does not resonate with the soul. When you discover what genuinely matters to you, discipline emerges as a natural expression of loyalty to yourself. It is no longer punishment but alignment. Thus, the first law of unbreakable discipline is to seek clarity of aim. Not superficial clarity, not mere ambition, but the deeper clarity of knowing what truly deserves your energy. When you find it, the scattered forces of your psyche will gather behind it, and discipline will cease to be a struggle. It will become a force that carries you forward with inevitability. The shadow is the hidden reservoir of everything we repress, deny, or refuse to acknowledge within ourselves. In this darkness lie not only our fears, weaknesses, and destructive impulses, but also immense energy and power that, if left unintegrated, turns against us. Many believe that discipline is achieved by silencing or suppressing these darker parts of the psyche, the laziness, the hunger for comfort, the avoidance of responsibility. Yet this is a mistake, for what we repress does not vanish. It gathers strength in the unconscious, waiting to sabotage us at the weakest moment. This is why so many fail in their pursuit of discipline. They fight against themselves instead of learning to redirect the forces that oppose them. The man who believes he can simply will himself into discipline while ignoring his shadow is like a ruler who tries to govern his kingdom while neglecting half of his subjects. The neglected half does not disappear. It conspires in silence until rebellion erupts. Every relapse, every sudden collapse of will, every quiet surrender to temptation is the uprising of this neglected shadow. To build unbreakable discipline, one must therefore make peace with it. This does not mean indulgence, nor does it mean obedience to the shadow's demands, but integration. Integration is the act of recognizing these impulses, accepting them as part of one's nature, and then directing their energy toward a higher aim. Consider procrastination. At first glance, it appears as mere weakness or avoidance. But beneath it lies a shadow desire, the wish to escape responsibility, to avoid pain, to preserve comfort. If you attempt to crush this desire with brute force, you will find it resurfacing endlessly. But if you ask yourself, what is this desire protecting me from? You uncover the deeper fear beneath it. Perhaps it is fear of failure, fear of judgment, or fear of inadequacy. By facing this fear directly, by accepting it as part of your psyche, you rob procrastination of its power. The energy that once fueled avoidance can now fuel preparation, caution, or resilience. In the same way, indulgence often hides the shadow's demand for pleasure in a life stripped of meaning. Laziness hides exhaustion born from a lack of purpose. Even anger, often repressed as dangerous, contains the raw vitality needed to pursue justice and strength. Every shadow impulse contains both danger and potential. The task of discipline is not to destroy these impulses, but to transform them. A man who integrates his shadow is no longer divided within himself. His impulses and will, once at war, begin to serve a common aim. He becomes whole, and wholeness is the foundation of true discipline. Therefore, unbreakable discipline cannot be built on repression. It can only be built on the integration of the shadow. To see yourself as you truly are, both the noble and the base, the disciplined and the indulgent, is to gain access to the full spectrum of your energy. Once this energy is harnessed, discipline ceases to be fragile. It becomes unshakable, for nothing within you remains an enemy. Routine is often mistaken for monotony, yet in reality, it is the architecture upon which discipline is built. The human psyche thrives not in chaos, but in structure. When your days are without order, your energy leaks into trivial decisions, your will is scattered, and temptation gains ground. Every time you must ask yourself what to do next, you open a door to hesitation, and hesitation is the enemy of discipline. Routine, therefore, is not a prison but a liberation. It removes the unnecessary choices that drain your strength and frees your mind to concentrate on what truly matters. Think of nature itself. The sun rises and sets with precision, the seasons follow one another with rhythm, and life flourishes not despite this repetition, but because of it. The psyche mirrors this natural law. When you establish rituals in your daily life, you bring your inner world into harmony with the order of existence itself. Routine conditions your unconscious to move forward without resistance. The body and mind learn to expect certain actions at certain times, and in that expectation, effort becomes lighter. What was once a struggle becomes automatic, and what was once a conscious demand becomes second nature. Yet many resist routine because they mistake freedom for the absence of structure. They believe that spontaneity is a sign of life, while order is a sign of rigidity. But in truth, the opposite is often the case. A man without structure is enslaved by his impulses. His day is ruled not by his will, but by whims, distractions, and moods. He imagines himself free, but he is the servant of every fleeting desire. A man with structure, on the other hand, is the master of his time. By committing to a routine, he creates space for genuine freedom to think, to create, to grow. For when the essentials are set in order, the mind is unburdened and capable of higher pursuits. Routine also protects discipline during moments of weakness. There will be days when your will is weary, when motivation abandons you, when every action feels heavy. In such moments, the absence of routine leaves you vulnerable to collapse. But a well-built routine carries you even when your spirit falters. It is the scaffolding that holds you upright when your strength wavers. By repeating an action daily, you transform it into ritual, and ritual has power even when belief is absent. Just as a worshiper may find comfort in prayer even when faith feels distant, so too does a disciplined man find stability in his routine even when his energy is low. To live without routine is to fight the same battle each day, to confront the same questions, to exhaust yourself with choices. To live with routine is to remove the battlefield itself. In this quiet structure, discipline finds permanence. It is not born from constant struggle, but from rhythm, from repetition, from the humility of doing small things daily until they shape the whole of one's life. Discipline does not arise in comfort, nor is it forged in ease. It is born in the furnace of resistance, in the confrontation with difficulty, and in the deliberate embrace of suffering. To imagine that discipline can be cultivated without hardship is to misunderstand the very nature of the human psyche. The unconscious resists change. It clings to what is familiar, to patterns that ensure survival even if they bring no growth. To break free from this inertia requires friction, and friction is always felt as discomfort. The man who avoids pain avoids transformation, and the one who flees discomfort flees from his own potential. In every human being there exists a deep tendency toward homeostasis, the desire to remain unchanged, to conserve energy, to remain within the narrow bounds of the known. This instinct serves life at the most primitive level, but it also becomes the greatest enemy of higher development. For growth demands movement, and movement demands energy spent against resistance. Discipline, then, is nothing other than the will to face resistance again and again until it no longer rules you. The pain you resist today becomes the barrier that defines the limit of your life. The pain you endure willingly becomes the threshold you cross toward a stronger self. Suffering, when consciously embraced, acts as a mirror. It shows you where you are weak, where you are afraid, where you lack endurance. In pain, you discover your excuses, your evasions, your false stories. But more importantly, in pain, you also discover your hidden strength, the reservoir of endurance you did not know was yours until you were forced to draw from it. It is through difficulty that the unconscious reveals to us the deeper energies waiting to be claimed. Every trial, every hardship, every burden carried with awareness adds another stone to the foundation of discipline. The tragedy of modern man is his endless search to escape discomfort. He builds lives of convenience, surrounds himself with distractions, and seeks comfort at every turn. Yet in this avoidance he weakens his very spirit. He becomes soft, fragile, easily broken by the smallest challenge. He confuses safety with fulfillment, forgetting that the psyche thrives not on endless ease but on struggle, on the overcoming of obstacles, on the triumph of will over resistance. To deny suffering is to deny growth. To deny growth is to deny life itself. Discipline is therefore not the absence of suffering, but the decision to endure it with purpose. It is the conscious choice to transform pain into strength rather than resentment, to see difficulty not as an enemy but as a teacher. The man who embraces discomfort does not become hardened in bitterness. He becomes tempered like steel. He learns that suffering cannot be eliminated from life, but it can be transfigured, made meaningful, and placed in the service of becoming. Thus, unbreakable discipline is not built by avoiding hardship, but by walking directly into it and discovering that in every wound lies the possibility of power. The true enemy of discipline is not weakness but inconsistency. A man may fail, and yet if he stands again, his failure becomes fuel. But a man who cannot sustain his efforts, who begins with fire and ends with ashes, will never know the power of transformation. Consistency is the silent force that turns discipline into destiny. It is not the grand gesture, nor the single act of will, but the small, repeated actions carried out over time that shape the contours of the soul. The unconscious does not bend to one dramatic decision. It is molded through rhythm, through persistence, through the steady repetition of chosen acts, until they become part of the fabric of one's being. Consider the sculptor who chips away at stone. One strike of the chisel changes nothing, but 1,000, directed in the same manner, reveal a form that was hidden within. The psyche is no different. You do not remake yourself in a day. Transformation requires the patient insistence of daily effort, the humble willingness to do today what you did yesterday, and to do it again tomorrow. Consistency is what bridges the chasm between intention and reality, between vision and embodiment. Without it, discipline dissolves into fleeting enthusiasm. Yet consistency is perhaps the most difficult virtue to cultivate, for it lacks the intoxication of passion. Passion burns brightly for a moment and then fades, while consistency demands the steady, unglamorous commitment to routine. It is not spectacular, and it is rarely admired by others, but it is the very thing that separates the dreamer from the doer. The man of consistency is not swayed by moods. He does not wait for the ideal conditions to act. He acts because action is his principle, not because he feels inspired. In this way, consistency disciplines not only the body but the emotions themselves, teaching the psyche that will is stronger than feeling. It is easy to excuse oneself from daily effort by appealing to fatigue, to lack of time, to changing circumstances. But these are the excuses of a fragmented will. The man who seeks true discipline understands that consistency does not mean perfection. It means refusing to abandon the path, even when the steps are small, even when progress is invisible. The unconscious is shaped not by intensity but by regularity. Just as the drip of water can carve stone, so too does consistent action carve character. Consistency also builds trust in oneself. Every time you follow through on what you said you would do, you strengthen the bond between your conscious will and your unconscious belief. You prove to yourself that your word has power, that your intentions are not empty. Inconsistency, on the other hand, breeds self-betrayal. It teaches your unconscious that your commitments are fragile, that your promises mean little. Over time, this erodes confidence and leaves you powerless. But through consistency, discipline becomes natural, inevitable, a law written into the structure of your life. Discipline without purpose becomes cruelty, a rigid system of self-punishment that exhausts rather than elevates. For discipline to endure, it must be tied to a vision, to a reason that transcends the immediate discomfort it demands. A man who forces himself to suffer without knowing why will eventually collapse under the weight of his own effort. But a man who suffers for a clear purpose transforms his pain into meaning. It is not the burden itself that crushes us, but the absence of a why. When the why is strong enough, the how becomes bearable. Purpose acts as the compass of discipline. It directs energy, organizes effort, and shields the mind from despair. Without it, discipline becomes blind repetition, a hollow routine that erodes the spirit. With it, discipline becomes devotion, an act of loyalty to the future self one is building. Every sacrifice is no longer seen as a loss, but as an investment. Every act of restraint is no longer deprivation, but preparation. It is in this connection to meaning that discipline finds its endurance. for no man can endlessly resist his impulses unless he knows what he resists them for. The psyche rebels against meaningless suffering. The unconscious will undermine any attempt at discipline that feels arbitrary or empty. This is why many men begin strong and soon falter. They have imposed rules upon themselves without tying those rules to a vision that animates them. They mistake discipline for punishment rather than recognizing it as a form of alignment with purpose. To endure hardship, one must see it as part of a greater story, one in which the trials of today prepare the foundation of tomorrow. Purpose also guards discipline against becoming tyrannical. Without a guiding meaning, discipline can turn into obsession, a compulsive control that suffocates life. The man who disciplines himself without balance becomes rigid, cold, and enslaved to his own rules. But when discipline serves a higher aim, it does not destroy vitality, it channels it. Purpose breathes life into sacrifice, ensuring that the structure of discipline remains in service of growth rather than domination. This is why those who have found a vision greater than themselves often appear unshakable. Their discipline is not forced but chosen, not mechanical but alive. The soldier who endures hunger, the artist who labors in solitude, the thinker who resists distraction. They do not suffer aimlessly. They are guided by a flame within, a vision that renders their trials meaningful. Their pain becomes sacred, for it is in service of something they value more than comfort. Thus, discipline cannot stand alone. It must be married to purpose, or else it will decay into bitterness or collapse under fatigue. When a man knows what he is building, discipline ceases to be a burden and becomes a path. It becomes not the enemy of freedom, but its very condition. For only the man who disciplines himself toward a vision of meaning can truly say that his suffering is not wasted, but transfigured into the architecture of his destiny. The highest form of discipline is not merely the ability to control oneself, but to transform that control into freedom. At first, this seems contradictory. How can the act of restraint, of limitation, of denying impulses, possibly lead to freedom? Yet this is the paradox of true strength. The man enslaved to his desires is not free. He is ruled by the shifting tides of appetite, emotion, and circumstance. He imagines himself liberated because he indulges every urge, but in truth he is bound, a puppet of forces he cannot master. The man of discipline, however, who has bent his impulses beneath the yoke of will, discovers that he is no longer tossed about by the chaos within him. He becomes the master of himself, and in mastering himself, he becomes free. Freedom is not the absence of boundaries, but the ability to shape them consciously. The child who refuses discipline is not free. He is at the mercy of his whims. The addict who gives in to every craving is not free. He is chained to his weakness. True freedom comes when one has trained the self to act according to chosen principles, rather than passing moods. It is the ability to say yes or no with authority, because one's will has been forged strong enough to command obedience from the body and the mind. Discipline is the hammer that forges this will. Without it, freedom is a hollow dream. The greatest men of history were not those who pursued freedom without restraint, but those who imposed discipline upon themselves so that their strength could serve a higher purpose. They were not dragged by impulse, they harnessed it. They were not distracted by every fleeting desire. They ordered their energies toward the realization of vision. Their freedom did not consist in doing whatever they wished, but in having the power to choose what truly mattered and to pursue it with unwavering focus. Such freedom is not granted by external society. It is conquered within. Discipline also liberates the mind from fear. When you have trained yourself to endure hardship, you cease to dread it. When you have learned to resist temptation, it no longer enslaves you. When you have built the habit of action, procrastination cannot paralyze you. The man who lacks discipline is always anxious, for he knows that he cannot trust himself. The man of discipline, on the other hand, carries an inner security, for he knows that whatever the circumstance, he has the strength to act. This is freedom, the absence of inner tyranny, the ability to move through the world without being undone by its trials. Thus, discipline is not the opposite of freedom, but its foundation. Without discipline, freedom becomes chaos, indulgence, weakness. With discipline, freedom becomes mastery, clarity, power. To master oneself is to walk through life unchained, not because the world has grown easier, but because one has grown stronger. The man who understands this no longer sees discipline as restriction, but as liberation, the doorway through which all true freedom must pass.